So last week, if you're here, if you remember, I was talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and I was talking about blessedness and happiness. And I thought I'd kind of continue along those same lines. Remember, I mentioned the word makarios, as interpreted as blessed or happy. Makarios was also understood, just to recap a little bit, makarios was understood in the context of a perfect meal at times. And so makarios then translated into the word macaroni for the meal. For kids, the perfect meal would be macaroni and cheese. And then I thought of another derivative word which may or may not have come from makarios, which was the word macarena. Right, remember the dance? Yeah, some of you are doing it right now. That's really good. Yeah. So happy meal, happy dance, happy place is what the Sermon on the Mount is about, the Beatitudes. And Jesus says to find that happy place within. And it is connected to being poor in spirit. It's connected to being with those who are grieving, or being humble, or if you hunger or thirst for righteousness, or if you are a peacemaker, pure in heart, if you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, or if you are all of those things, then you are blessed, then you are happy. Well, the whole of the Sermon on the Mount is from chapter 5 to chapter 7. And so that's why I decided to continue along the lines of blessedness and happiness, skipping over some of the parts. Today we land in chapter 6, verses 24 to 34. Now, in the beginning of this section, it's interesting that Jesus talks about money and the dangers of money. And I started a couple of weeks back talking about our stewardship, that we didn't talk about stewardship like we normally do in October, and we kind of are doing it at the beginning of this year. Society and the world likes to say to us, you are blessed, you are happy if you have a lot of wealth, or if you have a lot of money. And so we glamorize it, we get seduced by it, and we seem to gravitate towards it. By the way, does anyone know how much a 30-second commercial during the Super Bowl cost? Does anybody know? $8 to $10 million for 30 seconds. How much does a Super Bowl ticket cost? Does anybody know? $3,000? Well, the cheaper seats cost $4,000 to $7,000. How much are the average tickets? $10,000. Right. And I don't even want to know what the scalpers are asking. So how much do the winning players get if they win the Super Bowl? How much do they get each? Does anybody know? $178,000 each if they win the Super Bowl. How much do they lose if they lose? The losing team, each player gets $103,000. And of course, there are bonuses if they won during the playoffs as well. So, has anybody been to a live Super Bowl game, by the way? Yes, Dick have. So, this year, it's being played in Santa Clara, and does anybody know how much it costs to build that stadium? $1.3 billion in 2014. So I can't imagine how much it costs if they built it now. So I thought it would be interesting to compare that with the Cathedral of Our Lady of Angels Catholic Church in Los Angeles. Has anybody ever been there? So that is the mother church of the Catholic Church and the seat of who was, at the time in 2002, Roger Mahoney, the Archbishop. Does anybody know how much it cost to construct that cathedral in 2002? $250 million. Right. Does anybody know how much the altar table cost? $5 million. It was made out of Laguna marble. How about the door, the bronze door? $3 million. And the wooden lectern, $2 million. The bishop's chair, $1 million. And each pew, $50,000. The pipe organ, $163 million. Cathedral is 12 stories high, and it can seat 3,000 worshipers. So if you've been keeping up with Aloha Stadium, does anybody know what the projected cost for that will be? $650 million. Interesting. So Jesus uses the Greek word mammon, which is translated into money, which is also can be interpreted as well. So Jesus says no one is able to serve both masters or more than one masters. You may be for the short run, but in the long run, you will begin to hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. Now, for billionaires, I can understand those who really are driven that way. But let me put it maybe a different way. Have you ever found yourself interested in a hobby, but then it became more of an interest, and then it turned into a passion, and then it turned into an obsession, and then it turned into something all-consuming, and pretty soon it was idolatry? I must admit, I have found myself going through some of those stages. And so the diversions or the distractions can become obsessions and idolatry. Now, I have to return back to say, we're talking about blessedness and happiness, right? And money and wealth is not the source of blessedness and happiness, but it's the opposite what Jesus is saying. And if we quote 1 Timothy 6:10, it says, the love of money is the root of all evil, is the love of money. And in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from faith and pierced themselves with many pains. But we stress over money, right? We are anxious over money. What Jesus is trying to do in this passage is trying to take away our stress and our anxiety over money. He is trying to say, relax in life, trust, have faith, and be chill about it. And the way Jesus is leading us about this is that he takes this strange leap, right? He says, consider the birds, consider the flowers in relation to our stress about money and financial security. And so Jesus is mixing these metaphors with the birds and the flowers and money. So Mark beautifully described the birds. Marlu and I, when we were living in Santa Maria, we had a bird bath, and we used to watch the birds. And we loved to watch them, and we feed them until we got 2 cats, and they came around less and less. But in any case, we did love to watch them. And then in California, the popular thing for people to do is to drive to flower fields. So we would go to Carlsbad. I don't know if it's near San Diego. People would drive there. Or after the rains, we would go to the desert to see these flower fields. Marlou added a lot of flowers in our gardens. She would line the fences with geraniums and succulents and bougainvillea and crocus plants. There's something about just looking at birds or flowers, the beauty and serenity that melts away our anxieties and our worries. So Jesus then elaborates on this some more. But he goes further and he says, not only don't worry about money, but don't worry about your food, and don't worry about your drink, and don't worry about your clothing. And I would even venture to say what Jesus is saying to us, don't worry about your health and well-being in your future, even though we do, right? Because so much can go wrong in our life, like accidents or big mistakes or poor choices or other people's decisions that affect our decisions, which we don't have control over. And it's hard not to stress because we worry about doctors and hospitals and medications and retirement. And there's so many things to worry about. It's like we have this built-in mechanism in our minds that we worry and we tend to obsess. Why do we worry so much? I think it's rooted in fear. Fear that we will lose control, fear that we will lose what we have or what we have worked hard to get. We fear the loss of quality of life. We fear failure. We fear loss in general. We fear the worst. We fear losing our identity. We fear having to start all over. We fear giving up our position or our role or our status. And so Jesus says, look at the birds of the air and consider the lilies of the field. Not to become like the birds or not to become like the lilies, but consider their circumstance. So if we think a little bit deeper about this, let's think about birds. Okay, birds are free. Birds fly and explore. Now, in the scripture, Jesus says that birds don't toil or spin, but birds raise their young ones. Birds build nests. Birds feed the young. Birds push their young out of the nest to teach them how to fly. So, do we think that birds worry? I don't know. But they certainly take chances when they push the little ones off the nest. Birds also migrate, and they adjust to the weather, and they fly in flocks, and they travel in community and in safety. So in this neighborhood, there's a bird called the Pacific golden plover. Does anybody know about this bird? So they migrate from Alaska, right? And they travel 3,000 miles. And from what I was reading, it says nonstop. I can't imagine that. 3,000 miles. Do they worry when they're flying? I don't know, but I don't think so. I think they just fly and they just go and they just watch out for each other. How about the lilies of the field? Now we know that the lilies come out of the bulbs, right? And the bulbs are underground. And the bulbs are not visible to the human eye. But somehow the bulbs get nutrients. Somehow the bulbs have roots. and somehow they're able to blossom and bloom in the form of a flower. Now, to me, this is the brilliance of Jesus, because Jesus pairs the flowers and the birds together in this lesson. To me, the brilliance is that the flower produces nectar, and then the birds then also access the nectar, and then the birds spread seeds and cause other things to grow. So the birds and the flowers work together. Or like I think last week Jackie was talking about how the bees collect pollen, and which in turn produce honey and fertilize. And so the birds fertilize and pollinate, and it is a wonderful image of a symbiotic imagery where there is interdependence, where there is interconnection, where there's community and commonality. And all this activity in nature. And imagine that the flowers and the birds have no time to worry. But all they're doing is interacting and germinating and relying on each other. And Jesus says, even Solomon in all his beauty and all his splendor cannot compare. We know how rich Solomon was. And we know all the billionaires and the Solomons of today. They cannot compare to the birds and the flowers. And so, as we talk about and we think about stewardship and how much we give and how much we share and how much we invest in the church, not to worry, but to just keep connected and working together and supporting each other and glorifying God together. I was at a funeral yesterday, and some of you were there. It was Dot Bloom's funeral. And if you know Dot Bloom, she is the mother of Sam Domingo's wife, Lily. So they were giving testimony about their grandmother, and one of the grandkids, I think it was the grandkids, kept saying to his grandmother, "Who do you love more? Do you love me more than the other grand?" And kept bothering her and bothering her. And finally she said, "When you are giving, when you are loving, when you are giving and when you are loving, you keep getting more." And I thought that was pretty profound. Because when we are sharing, when we are loving, it returns back even more, and it never stops. I thought that was a pretty good response to the grandson. So like the birds that soar with possibilities, like the flowers that radiate beauty and glory, we can let go of our anxiety, and we can not have to worry. We just trust and we just believe, and we know that God mysteriously provides, and with each other we can provide for each other as well. And without worry, we can invest in this community, in this church, so that we can continue to impact and affect others in need. So as we continue then in our faithfulness, in our service, in our sacrifice, we think of the birds of the air, we think of the flowers of the field. We don't have to worry. Don't worry. Be happy. Amen?